Do good work is not a label, but a way of living. It is the constant and diligent effort to achieve a new level of excellence in one's own life. It is the hidden inner beauty behind the struggle to achieve excellence. It's not perfect, but imperfect. It is the effort, discipline, and focus that often goes unnoticed. The goal of Do Good Work is to highlight that drive. The guests I have on this show emulate this drive in their own special way. You'll be able to apply new ideas into your own life by learning from them. We will also have one-on-one episodes with me where we'll dive into my own experience with entrepreneurship and leadership. Every episode is designed to provide you with ideas that you can apply and grow in excellence in all areas of your life, business, and career. Today on the show, we have Dr. Karen Dietz. Karen is a veteran consultant and coach of transformational business storytelling. She is also the best-selling author of Business Storytelling for Dummies and has recently created a free toolkit for transformational communication through a crisis, which contains concrete and practical steps for leaders in companies to take during the COVID-19 situation. Karen has presented at TED Talks, has been interviewed countless times for her business storytelling, and has contributed to other 8 books on business storytelling. Some of her clients include Disney, Princess Cruises, Viasat, Rising Stars, and nonprofits. She is on the mission to teach transformational storytelling to help you change your world. Karen, it's an honor to have you on the show. Welcome.
Oh, thank you, Raul. It's a pleasure being here.
Well, Karen, I really want to dive into this because you mentioned in our intake talking about agile communication. And I would like for you just to give us a little bit more about what does it mean to be an agile storyteller and how does that apply to businesses today?
Oh, yeah, that's really a great question. Storytelling, I tell you, it's so rich. There's so much involved in it. So many different kinds of skills you can build. Everything from how do you craft a story to how do you deliver a story to what do you do after the story. And so the impression is that it can take a long time, right, to master storytelling.
Yeah.
And what I've been able to do over the years, for a number of reasons, is I've been able to find shortcuts, ways to train people in storytelling so that those skills get built really fast. And so that's a part of being agile. I have to know something, I have to know it. Now, it's not only know it, I have to be able to do it.
And apply it, right?
And apply it, yes. And I've been the last, 5, 6, 7 years, just really been focusing on perfecting these techniques so that people, when I work with them, can move fast. The other thing about agile storytelling is that there is more than one way to tell a story. And you will tell a story differently depending on the audience, who you're with.
Or in the purpose.
And the purpose. Right, absolutely. What's the context? What's the setting? Where are you? Who are you speaking to? Why are you speaking with them? And so you have to learn how to shift and change the story in real time so that you're not spending a lot of time with someone like me on, okay, I've got this presentation coming up. Now let's spend 6 hours getting me to be able to tell that story. Now you've got to know how to do it pretty fast.
In an effective way.
And because sometimes these speaking engagements come up really fast. Oh, like tomorrow, realize I have to give a presentation, a high-risk presentation, so I need to make sure that I really am influential and engaging and inspiring and all that kind of good stuff. So
it's being able to move fast, right? With the techniques.
Right. So again, to move fast. So the techniques I use with people help them when I'm not around to deliver confidently and to be that inspiring leader that people are looking for.
And I love that. And I want to dive into maybe more scenarios in a bit, but I want to imagine, I'm holding a pen for the video podcast right now, but if you're an audio, just imagine me holding a pen. But think about this as a tool, a toolkit, and storytelling is a tool specifically for that. Now, the tool you can use for multiple different options, criterias, and it's very powerful in the way that you can actually focus if it's product development, if it's product storytelling, if it's sales development, if it's customer service in your business. So the tool can be applied in multiple ways. And Karen, in your experience over the last 5 to 10 years, can you give us some examples of how I can use this tool of storytelling with some of the tactics that you teach in order to get the highest leverage in my areas of the business?
Okay, so let's talk about mindsets first, because how we think about storytelling then shapes how we apply it.
Okay.
Right? And our thinking informs our actions. So one of the things that I always talk about with my clients from the very beginning is that storytelling is a way that we think, and it's a way we communicate. We're already hardwired for storytelling.
Correct.
Now, when we get into business, we think that our competence is displayed when we use business speak and jargon. Unfortunately, what happens when our brain is on jargon and a lot of business speak, it's a lot of concepts, it's a lot of very high language, not how we would speak when we're talking with our friends. Right? What happens to our communication is that it becomes less engaging and less inspiring. And so we forget that storytelling is the way to be engaging and inspiring, the way to communicate knowledge, the way to enroll people in our vision, the ways to create alignment, the ways to dissolve stereotypes.
Okay.
And so we start thinking of storytelling as an experience that we're giving people. If we think of storytelling as a way that we already think and communicate, then we can actually consciously leverage storytelling for whatever situation we are in.
I love that.
So there are many applications. I can take a look at an organization and I can say, all 9 business functions of an organization, storytelling has a role in. I work with CFOs. How do you communicate the number and meaning, the numbers, right? How do you create the numbers and communicate them in a meaningful way? So when I work with CFOs, it's how do you share the numbers in a meaningful way so that people walk away and go, oh, I get exactly what's going on, and oh, I know exactly the decision I need to make. Or now I know how that we are aligned together, like these different parts of the organization. And as a group, we can get behind the project or the initiative. It applies to marketing, sales, of course. It applies to finance. It applies to operations. It applies to almost every single part of a business because it's how we communicate.
And I love that. And I think for our listeners, it would be pretty cool to learn more about some of your real life experiences using storytelling to transmit an experience. And I like that you mentioned it's not just information, but it's transformational storytelling, where you're providing an experience through the story for a specific audience or a specific subset of the business. And I'd love to dig in a little bit more on some of the real world applications.
Okay, great. So I've worked in a variety of different story projects over the years for many of those 9 areas of a business. But I once worked for a cruise company, one of the largest, and they had been working for years on developing their brand principles. And then they got to the point where they said, okay, we have our brand principles, but I wonder if our customers are actually having the experiences that we say they should be having. So we best test those brand principles. And they concluded that collecting the stories from customers' experiences of what it was like to be on one of their cruises, that would be the best way to test and to see if actually the customer experience matched what the company was saying. So a colleague of mine, Molly, and I, they sent us on a 9-day, 10-day cruise. And our job was to collect as many customer stories as we could during that time. So we did some story gathering sessions with a variety of passengers and collected like so many stories. By the end of it, we had like over 230 usable items.
Oh, wow.
We had full stories. We had partial stories. We had amazing taglines that just popped through as people were sharing. And it was so invigorating and inspiring for everybody, because what would happen is that one customer would share a story and somebody would say, oh, yeah, I had a similar experience like that. And then another customer said, oh, yeah, it happened for me like that, but maybe it's slightly differently. And they'd share that story. And these sessions would go on for a long time. And people were just so excited to share their stories about what it was like to be on the cruise. And most of these were like very powerful stories, very positive stories. Now, the bottom line from that whole project was that, yes, the brand principles were validated. The customers, the experiences that they were having on the cruise line actually matched, right, what the cruise company was saying. So everybody was a big winner. And it ignited 2 other internal storytelling projects within the company to surface more stories.
That's really powerful. And I want to break that down into chunkable sizes, because you share a lot of value, not only in the testing of, gathering, and then implementation of stories. And if you're listening to this and you're saying, I don't have a cruise ship, let's set that aside, because specifically every single business typically is 90% similar to one another. You have customers right now. Your customers are having a brand experience, and that's either aligned with the experience that you want your customers to have, or it's not aligned. And it's your job to make sure that we know. So when you set up these experiments and tests, obviously you derived from this cruise company to gather stories in person. So it sounds like you did group storytelling, group extraction, correct?
Yes. And there's specific techniques to do that work really well. And that, again, are more on the agile side of the equation than the long, laborious. But yeah, so that was one really powerful application.
So the group sharing. And let's say you have an email list right now and you don't have a physical cruise location or a physical shop where your customers go and you can do these group settings.
Right.
Karen, how can listeners set up a story extraction experience in a group setting where most of their customers have a digital relationship with the company?
Oh, this is a great question. Again, Raul, I'm going to go back to what I said earlier, that storytelling is about sharing experiences. And often the biggest mistake companies make when they want some input from their customers is they'll run focus groups, which is not bad. That's a good thing to do. But too often what the focus is on is a thought or an opinion. So what do you think about X, right? Or what strikes you about our product when it does this? So you get thoughts and opinions, but when you ask for a story, tell me about your experience of our product the first time you tried to use it.
Okay, that's different as opposed to tell me about this specific pinpoint.
Right. You can use, there are magic phrases to use to evoke a story, and one is tell me about, but you have to be specific. Tell me about what happened when
Okay.
you tried to buy or you bought a product from us on our website.
Okay.
Tell me what happened when you used our product. Tell me about the time you used our product for the first time. Tell me what happened when you opened up the box you got from us and saw all the goodies inside. What was your experience? What happened?
Interesting. So it's more open-ended and it's for pivotal points in the customer relationship.
Sure. So you can gather stories along any point in the customer journey. From how did you hear about us Tell me about the time you first stumbled across our company. What were you doing? How did it happen? What were you thinking? So share with us that experience. So you see, I'm prompting you in certain ways, but I really am much more interested in the experience you had of us instead of what you thought about us, right?
Interesting.
And these are like very fine distinctions, but they're really important distinctions. Because if I say to you, Raul, what do you think about Amazon?
Then I'd give you an opinion based about what I think right now, right? Or
Yeah. So let's try it out. What do you think about Amazon?
I think Amazon's eating the world. It's growing and it's expanding.
And then, so tell me about your last shopping experience on Amazon.
I ordered something for my new address and it got redirected because they couldn't find the address.
That's interesting. So then what happened?
We'll find out later today, actually.
Okay, great. So there's another thing that I want to point out to you. And this is something that almost everybody does when they're first starting out with storytelling. And that is, I'll say, oh, tell me about a time when, or tell me about your last shopping experience on Amazon. And it goes something like, this happened, and then this happened, and this happened.
Yes.
So it's like a reporting of events, like a timeline, right? So I could say, oh, I was sitting at my desk one day, the phone rang, I picked it up, and there was somebody from my high school. Or I could drop back into the actual experience, remember the actual experience. And I could say, oh, I was sitting at my desk one day. I was concentrating so hard. The phone all of a sudden rang, totally startled me, but I picked it up. And there on the other end was a voice I hadn't heard in 30 years.
It's more deeper. It's a deeper way to connect with the other person, from emotions to empathy to understanding where they're coming from and understanding what matters to them.
Yes. And it's also, I am really just remembering my experience as opposed to giving you a report of what happened.
Exactly.
Right? So I think of those reports as like being at the 6,000 foot level.
Yeah.
And when I'm actually telling a story, I'm right there back in the experience, remembering the experience, reliving the experience. And when I share from that, certain things happen to our brains. One of the first things that happens, and this has been shown by functional MRIs, the neuroscientists have run these tests. And what happens is that when I actually start sharing a story, 7+ areas of my brain light up. And when a listener is listening to my story, all of those 7+ areas of their brains get lit up.
Okay.
And the neuroscientists call this neural coupling. So our brains link and they couple together. They entrain together.
That's interesting.
Now, how long does it take to have that happen, that neural coupling happen? They timed it. It's 1 to 2 seconds.
You say,
so that
wow.
goes 1, 2. 1, 2. That's how long it takes.
That's interesting.
So if you want to connect with people, your best way to connect with people and to connect with people very deeply is to share a story.
That's pretty astounding that it takes 2 seconds, and it relates a lot to, there's a lot of different applications and I want to dive into those applications when you have the story. Because right now we talked about the gathering of the stories, understanding why it's important, and connecting humans, because it's human to human at the end of the day, no matter what you're doing.
It is.
But then when it comes to the application, how do you, let's say you have those 200 stories, how do you process that in a way where you don't mute out the actual emotions, the things that will have you relate to other people, and be able to have an outcome in regards to a goal that you have for the company or a goal that you have for an initiative? How do you marry those two?
It's all about the audience. It's never about you.
Okay.
What I mean by that is that you may have a lot of stories that you could tell.
Mm-hmm.
And what the process that you go through is to understand a lot more about the audience that you're speaking with,
Mm-hmm.
who they are, what they're trying to accomplish, what decisions they're trying to make, what do they need. That's basically what you're trying to figure out, trying to understand what do they need. And then you share your story to meet that need.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense. And then you mentioned that it takes 1 to 2 seconds though. So when you share the story, how can you, without tampering with the integrity of the original story, how can you share it in a way that it makes the most impact within the first 2 seconds?
There are some standard ways to do it.
Mm-hmm.
One is you can use a stock phrase that gets us all started. And one of those stock phrases is, so there I was.
Okay.
Yeah? It's like, where were you? What was happening?
Just a simple opener, and then from there facilitating the
Right.
story.
I remember the time when I learned a real tough lesson around fear. Now, I'm not telling the story. I'm not telegraphing you the end of the story. I'm not telling you the end of the story. Right?
It's a
I'm just
pretty
saying,
slick headline, though. It's a retrospective headline, right? You call it a stock phrase.
Right. There's a few standard ways to always get into a story and to signal to the audience, oh, story coming. Or to immediately hook them into the story.
Interesting.
One way it's a very powerful way to start a story is to say, it was the dead of night. I was out in the woods and I just lost my flashlight.
It's almost like writing a novel or like a scene in a play or a movie.
Right. So that is called in media res, but that is basically Latin for saying, drop me right into the problem. So usually you say, I was living in Kentucky at the time. It was about the year 2000. And I was sitting around with my friends and we were having a discussion about XYZ. So that's like a preamble into getting into a story. You're setting the stage for the problem.
It pulls the audience in, right? And as opposed to shoving a message towards in your face.
For many years, we were told, when you're speaking in front of a group, tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you just told them. And that is not effective.
Really? Okay.
At all. When I share a story, what happens is that I don't have to describe a whole lot. Like I tell a story about being in Paris. There's a poet who was living there at the time. It was one of these gorgeous spring days. And he goes out for a walk, and then he has an adventure on that walk. And so all I need to do is to say, so it's in Paris. We're in Paris. It's one of those gorgeous spring days. The kind of spring day where you can smell that new growth on the air, and yet you can still also feel that little chill of winter.
Okay.
And there was a poet living there at that time, and on that day he said, oh my God, I've got to go for a walk. And so he did. And as he's walking down the streets of Paris, he spies up ahead of him this beggar sitting on the sidewalk. Next to a coffee and pastry shop, there was a bell above the door. A lot of people going in and out. The poet, his name was Jacques, decides to stop and see how the beggar was doing, because he saw that the beggar had a cardboard sign in front of him, and the beggar, and on that sign it said, blind, no pension, please give. And he had a cup in front of him. So Jacques wanted to know how the guy was doing. So he stops and asks him, and the beggar says, oh, that's terrible. I just don't know what I'm going to do. I'm almost in total despair because no one's stopping and talking with me. No one is giving me coins in my cup. So I'm scared because I really don't know how I'm going to make it, and I don't know what's going to happen next. So Jacques, the poet, says, well, maybe I can change your sign. Would that be okay? And beggar goes, oh, I don't know. It's okay.
Give it a shot.
But on the back, right?
Okay.
So if I want to turn it around, I can. And the next thing that beggar hears is the scratch of Jacques' pen on that cardboard. So when Jacques is done, he puts the sign back down next to the beggar and bids him good day and goes on his way. And then it's 2 weeks later, another one of those gorgeous spring days. Jacques goes, I go for a walk, and takes the same route he did before. Checks in with the beggar. The beggar goes, oh my gosh, it's amazing. People are stopping and talking to me all day. People are talking to me. They're filling my cup. Sometimes I have to empty it 2-3 times a day. I think I'm going to be okay. It's really, everything is fine. And Jacques says, I felt so wonderful. Thank you for telling me that, and bid him good day to continue on his walk. But the beggar goes, wait, I got to know. What did you write on my sign? And Jacques wrote, spring is here, but I will not see it.
An opener is for a conversation.
So when I tell this story to a group of people, I always ask, so what did you see? What images came to your mind as I was telling the story? People will say, oh, I saw Jacques, and I ask them, what did he look like? Oh, he had a beret on. Other people say, oh, he had a beard. And different people see different things.
Mm-hmm.
They say, oh, I saw him walking down the sidewalk. No, I actually saw everything through Jacques' eyes.
Interesting.
What did the beggar look like? Did you see the beggar? Oh, yeah, he looked like this. Other people say, no, he looked like that. I said, did anybody smell anything? Some people say, oh, I smell the beggar. Not everybody does, right? But a lot of people smell the coffee and the pastry from the pastry. So my point in sharing all of this, that our mind fills in the blanks.
So you don't have to be as descriptive when you tell the story, but you can still facilitate the experience. And I bet you today, like during the end of my day, I'm going to remember that story because I've made a lot of neural connections.
Absolutely. It's easy for you to remember it. You'll actually be able to retell it.
And that's actually extremely important when you're talking to others, is not only that you communicate effectively, but that they can actually interpret it correctly and take the appropriate actions based on that information.
Yes. And people will make their own meaning and of the story, because that's what we do. We are meaning-making animals, and when we hear a story, then we'll derive some meaning from it for ourselves. Mm-hmm. And the role of the storyteller sometimes is also to share, why you shared that story, what it means to you. And so what that story means to me is, first of all, there's something that's really important that happens in that story when Jacques, we find out what he wrote on that sign. And there's a shift that he creates for us, and that is a shift into empathy, where now for just a moment, we begin to experience what life might be like for that beggar. The other reason I love to tell that story is because everybody sees and experiences different things when I share that story, but we all agree that empathy was a result.
Key central stone. And that's pretty interesting, because I want to shift a little bit in regards to some of the toolkits that you have right now when it comes to using storytelling in a way like we just did, but having communication, especially right now when we're having a lot of, I wouldn't say a team crises, but a lot of people are working remote. There has to be important things communicated in a remote setting. And we have to have our team and our staff make sure that we're on board, make sure that we're healthy, make sure that we're doing well. And a lot of it is in regards to empathy and ensuring that the team or whoever you're working with, if your employees or the team or the division of the company, feels safe telling their stories in an environment so that the company or the team can grow as a whole. So I'm really curious, how are we adapting that in today's age now with some of the things going on?
I think the first lesson is to listen for stories before you tell stories.
Okay.
Now, there's one little caveat there, is that sometimes we need to tell a story to prime the pump. Right?
Okay.
To say, oh, I'd love to hear your stories about X. Like the time that happened to me, this is what happened to me. But that was my experience. What happened for you? And so that's priming the pump, but the focus is really all about listening to their stories. So instead of you coming in, let me share a story to create alignment and be inspiring and what have you. So let me go do that, right? That'll only get you so far. And as leaders, particularly what we need to do is to do less storytelling and more story listening.
Interesting. How do you set the stage for story listening, especially with a team that's remote? And I'll give you a real example. Sometimes it's very difficult to extract because the team might be used to getting information or being pushed information as opposed to
Yes,
giving.
yes, yes. So this is the difference between pushing messages out, pushing information, and pulling people into our worlds and
Yeah.
being pulled into their worlds. Right? One technique that really works is when you send a note individually to each team member, right? And say, right, there's going to be a time during the meeting when everybody's going to be sharing their stories about X, because we're really trying to understand what life is like for you in this remote environment. And so think about the story that you want to share. And then the meeting happens the next day, and you've given them plenty of time to think about it and sift and sort through, this is what I want to share, as opposed to being put on the spot, right?
Interesting. Okay. And then that allows, like we just mentioned, story gathering and then of the dissecting of information based on an actual.
And that is particularly great for a team that is used to sharing information. But now you know that you really need to start hearing stories. So how do you make that shift? And that's one little simple technique you can use to start making that shift. If your team has already been sharing stories about their experiences, even personally, some professionally, some about client work, whatever, then you already have a basis for sharing stories. And you can say, oh yeah, we typically share stories about what's happening with our customers around this particular project, or stories about where we are, right, in a particular project. And that's good, but what I want to hear from you today is your experience about working on this project when you're working at home. What's happening for you? What are you dealing with? To share with us a particular challenge, right? Or how did you overcome that challenge? You want to get them thinking, but you say, really, I want to listen to these stories.
And listen for, I think, emotional parts as well. And I think the best way to capture those is either in camera, face-to-face. Second would be, I would assume, video. And the third would be text, but that would be like a last resort.
Yeah, text would be last resort, and it could be over the phone. It could be, it's interesting, the medium doesn't really matter so much except the written. It's less effective when you ask somebody to write, share with me your experience in an email. You just don't get the kind of connection that you want because the brains don't connect. Remember, go back to our neuroscience.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't have to be on video. Some people might not want video. So it doesn't really matter. I think the main point is that you're listening. You're asking for an experience. You're saying you're really interested. You want to know about what's happening for them. And so please share. And now there's a 3-step process for story listening, because story listening is different than other kinds of listening. And very few people recognize this unless they've been coached by me or taken one of my classes or read any of my blogs. So story listening is actually the most powerful place and the most powerful leverage point for any leader. And story listening there is a 3-step process. It's not hard to do. Takes a couple tries to get used to it. But basically what you're doing is you are asking for a story. Tell me about what happened when. Tell me about a time when. Tell me about your experience of this. And then you sit back and you just listen delightedly without any kind of an agenda. You're not allowed to interrupt and you're not allowed to take notes. You are there to be fully present for that person. You are there to just listen delightedly, just for the joy of listening. And what happens when you do that? is that, and you've had this experience, we've all had this experience, when we feel really deeply and listened to, and we feel that we've been well listened to, something brilliant pops through, and we're kind of going, where'd that come from?
You're waiting for that moment, but pretty much you're allowing them to share that moment.
It just happens naturally. It's not even something you can really engineer. It just happens.
Yeah.
Not all the time, but frequently enough. What's happening is that you're allowing their own brilliance to shine through.
I love that.
What is not to love about that? Because again, it's not about you, it's about them. So that's the first step. Just listen delighted. Just kick back, listen for the joy of listening, don't interrupt, and don't take notes. And then when they're done finishing their story, then you ask some questions. But there are two kinds of questions in the world. There's information questions, and then there are reflective questions.
Interesting.
Information questions are what we always default to. Oh, what year did that happen? Where were you living when that happened? What was that person's name? I missed that. All of those information questions, all about you again, because it's stuff that you missed in the story or you're curious about in the story, but it doesn't help the storyteller get better at whatever it is they're trying to express. It doesn't help you understand anything really more deeply about the story. So we put those informations on hold. You ask them at the very end. What's most important is to ask reflective questions first. Oh gosh, I love that story that you just told me. What do you like about it?
About them to self-reflect on different points.
Yes. What does that story mean to you? What lesson did you learn? Do you think you learned from that? Or what decision do you think you made based on that experience? And there's several kinds of reflective questions, and you can pick and choose which one that you want to ask for. By the way, all of this is in the toolkit. And so you go through those reflective questions, and people go, "Oh, wow, yeah, that's great. That's deep. Really learned something from that." And then the third step starts, and that is the listener, that's usually the leader, only shares what they loved about the story. Nothing else.
And you would still ask your information questions prior to the step or after the step?
Way after it.
Way after. Oh, really? Okay.
So appreciations first. Everything that you loved about that story, just appreciate. Oh, I loved it when you said this. Oh, I really resonated when this happened in the story. When you got to this part, I could really see it in my mind.
Interesting. And then closing with a thank you for sharing? Or how would you close? Okay.
Yeah, and so I really want to thank you for that. It was a very meaningful and powerful story, which they usually are when you're doing story listening.
It's a 3. So the first step again is just listen and use delightedly. No notes. No questions. Just listen and allow their brilliance to shine. The second step, ask reflective questions.
Yeah.
The third step is just thank them for sharing.
Yeah. Appreciate specific things that they told you in their story.
Okay. So obviously you have to take mental note about that.
Because it's a story. It resonates with you in some way. Just like you'll remember that poet's story and you could retell it sometime later on today with a friend or a colleague or a partner. It's the same way with the stories that they tell you. You're going to remember it. You're going to say, wow, I really like that part of the story. And, when you said this, it really resonated with me. And I could tell this is emotional for you. And I felt that.
No, and I love that because this can be used in so many different formats, especially for leaders nowadays. This is this can elicit very transformative processes, implementations, and changes for companies. And I can definitely see that working in current teams.
Right. Because what is the outcome of story listening? There are a couple outcomes. One is you get far more richer, deeper, more meaningful information about what's going on. Second, like we said, or in the neuroscience of storytelling, you immediately connect with that person and they connect with you.
Have a stronger relationship.
Much deeper. Like I do story listening at conferences with several hundred people, and I can't tell you how many times people come up to me afterwards and say, Karen, I can't wait to introduce you to my long lost brother who I never knew I had. They've never even known each other before they sat down next to each other. at the conference session, and within this 3-step process where each person does it, takes all of 15 minutes.
Wow.
Right?
Okay.
They come to me and say, I cannot believe the depth of relationship now that I have with this person who I never even knew before.
Through the power of a story.
Through the power of the story listening.
So many applications for this.
Yes. And so what's not to love about that? But you know what? When you give people this experience of listening to their story using this 3-step process, people walk away feeling seen, heard, and valued.
And you're empowering your people at that point.
Yes, because every single person on the planet wants to be seen, heard, and valued. And the number of times in our lives that we feel truly seen, heard, and valued is not as many as we need.
Yeah, I would equate it to being either close family or relationships at that point. That's interesting. And you have all of this specifically in the toolkit. Can we talk a little bit more about the toolkit?
Yeah. So the toolkit has a couple sections. And the first section is why do we need a toolkit during the pandemic to communicate better with everybody? And it's basically because we all need hope. We all need reassurance. We all need some inspiration. Mm-hmm. And we all need to feel that even though in these uncertain times it's pretty crazy, we need to find like some stability, a little port in the storm here.
Yeah.
And so how you communicate is going to either do that or not.
Yeah, it's true.
So let's talk about how you do that. And then I also talk about the power of purpose and how for leaders, purpose is a key place to make pivots in your business. And when you understand the purpose of your business, then you can make decisions that are in alignment with that purpose, and you can pivot a lot faster. And I give examples of companies that actually have been able to do that using purpose as the place for making those pivots. And then after that, I go through a couple models. One is it's really important as a leader to know which story to tell at the right time.
Very
Particularly
true.
as we're going through an amazing change process. Mm-hmm. We're going to come out of this pandemic experience different than when we came in.
True.
We're not going to go back to the way it was before.
No.
So we're in this change process. So people need to hear the right stories at the right time that fits with where they are along that cycle of change. And so here's the cycle of change. I give that model, right? So you can figure out, who's where, or where are we as a company in this cycle of change? And then what are the stories that I need to be listening for? What are the stories I need to be telling?
Depending on your specific situation.
Yes.
I love that.
Because a good example is when 9/11 happened so many years ago. And the administration was really great about saying, okay, we really need to combat terrorism and do something about it. And so we made all these changes. The TSA was born, right? Yeah. And security got ramped up in a whole bunch of different areas. And now we have cameras on every, street corner. But what was the administration telling us a year later? They were still doing that same message. Oh, yeah, we need to really, combat terrorism. And we as a populace are going, well, yeah, we got that. We got that a year ago.
Yeah.
Right? We want to know how is it going, right?
Progress.
We want to know the progress. What strides have we made? Where are the successes? What lessons have we learned? What adjustments have we made? Nada. None of that was being shared. And so this was when the stories that we needed to hear and the stories that were being told were going like this.
So there's a disconnect with audience, and then you can even lose faith within your company, right? Like understanding the leadership and understanding where we're at actually and what we're being told versus what we're seeing.
Credibility, trust, all of that goes down the drain.
Yeah. Interesting. So having a specific story and story listening for specific situations and then what to do with that. And
so I share all of that in the model.
I love that. Where's the best place for listeners to get the model?
On my website at KarenDietz.com. That's Karen, and then D as in Delta, IETZ.com. /toolkit-A is an apple. So toolkit-A.
And we'll have that
it,
link in the show notes too, just to make it easier.
Yes. It's a 45-page toolkit.
Oh
There is, and it's all practical. It's, okay, this is the mindset. Here's why you need to do this. But here are the models and the processes, including story listening and how to apply story listening during these times, where you can apply it. And so it's rich. It's chock full of practical go-to stuff you can do tomorrow.
And I love that, because I think not only storytelling can be applied for leadership change, management change, or even process change, but it can be applied, like you mentioned, finance, marketing, customer development, product development. There's a lot of different applications for this. And I think we can have probably an endless podcast episode just discussing the top 9.
I mean, there was a great book that was just published this year by a colleague of mine, Jean Storlie, Storlie, all about using storytelling for innovation.
I love that.
So, yeah, it's a rich world for storytelling, and there are so many different applications. And as a leader, my humble opinion, mastering storytelling gives you so much more power and influence and leverage in getting your work done. Right? Getting work done through people, getting projects done, managing, seeing yourself through change, sparking innovation, being able to share those numbers in a way that's inspiring and people really get, being able to transfer knowledge to win the talent wars. You have a strong culture. If you live your values, you're telling those stories of your values and how you live those values, you're going to attract top talent to you, because people like it when that's happening in an organization. So you asked about applications. We could go on forever about the application.
But you bring up a huge point, right? Attracting that talent, part 1. Maintaining that talent, part 2. Facilitating that work, etc. It's honestly the whole life cycle of business and as an evolution as business grows.
Yes, absolutely, both. And so it's really great when companies, when they're young, master storytelling, because this is one of the most powerful ways you can grow your company. Right? By sharing customer stories, by sharing your marketing stories, by sharing your origin story and how you got started and why the company exists, to share your vision story. You look at Tom's Shoes, what happened when they actually were sharing their vision story about giving away shoes to kids in Argentina, things just skyrocketed for them. There's so many ways that you can use storytelling to grow your business. And then once you have gotten into that stabilizing phase, then you need to really hone in on storytelling for building culture, building a strong culture, being able to have that culture grow and expand as new people, come on board. And your growth continues.
The life cycle of storytelling, but it never ends. That's the thing. That doesn't really end, because we're always with humans, human to human.
And we all think in stories. We all talk in stories. So why not leverage storytelling?
Oh, awesome. Karen, I really do thank you for being on today and sharing in this experience. We'll have the link to the show notes. And Karen, thank you again.
Oh, thank you, Raul. It's been a pleasure and always an enjoy being with you and, of course, talking about storytelling.